In Tudor England, a woman's reputation meant everything. One rumour could destroy her life. Elizabeth Tudor understood this better than most. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been executed after being accused of infidelity. From a young age, Elizabeth learned that power was dangerous, and scandal could be deadly. But even she could not escape it. As a teenage princess, Elizabeth found herself at the centre of a troubling situation inside her own household. A man close to the royal family, charming, ambitious, and dangerous, began to cross the line. This was not just careless behaviour, it was part of a wider struggle for power. What followed would become known as the Seymour Scandal, a moment that nearly destroyed Elizabeth's reputation, damaged her standing, and threatened her future before it had even begun. Following the death of Henry VIII in 1547, the English throne passed to his only legitimate son, the 9-year-old Edward VI. The boy was far too young to rule on his own, so power fell into the hands of ambitious men who surrounded the throne like predators. Among those eager to seize this opportunity was Thomas Seymour, a man driven by ambition and a deep hunger for influence. He believed he was the best person to guide the young king, and in truth, to rule through him. However, Thomas's ambitions were quickly frustrated, instead of being elevated. It was his elder brother, Edward Seymour, who was chosen to lead the government. Edward was appointed Lord Protector, which gave him great power over the kingdom and left Thomas in his shadow. Though Thomas was granted a position on the Regency Council established to govern until the king came of age, it was a role that offered influence, but not dominance. As Edward Seymour grew more powerful, Thomas became increasingly resentful. Watching his brother gain almost complete control of England made his jealousy worse. He felt ignored and treated unfairly. Determined not to remain sidelined, Thomas began searching for other ways to elevate his position at court. His opportunity came in the form of Catherine Parr, the intelligent and respected sixth wife of Henry VIII, recently widowed after the king's death. Charming, calculating, and bold, Thomas moved quickly. By pursuing a relationship with Catherine, he sought not only companionship but also a strategic advantage, one that could bring him closer to the centre of royal power and reshape his fortunes in the dangerous world of Tudor politics. Catherine Parr and Thomas Seymour had known each other long before the death of Henry. For many years they cared deeply for each other. They had even planned to marry and their future seemed certain. Everything changed when Catherine caught the king's attention. When Henry chose to marry her, she had little choice. She had to set aside her feelings for Seymour and become queen. However, those feelings never truly disappeared. After the king's death, they only grew stronger. Within weeks, their relationship became serious, and Catherine accepted his proposal of marriage. The timing was risky. It had been only 4 months since Henry's death. More importantly, she needed permission from the Regency Council to remarry. Thomas Seymour knew this permission would likely be refused. Seymour, ever impatient and ambitious, chose to ignore the rules and act anyway. Around May 1547, he and Catherine were married in secret, far from the watchful eyes of the court. It was a bold and risky move. It broke royal tradition and showed that Seymour was willing to ignore authority to get what he wanted. At first, neither the king nor the council was told about the marriage. When it became known, it caused a small scandal. King Edward and his sister Mary I were deeply upset. Many people across England also saw the marriage as inappropriate and even disgraceful. There was strong anger toward Catherine, as many believed Henry VIII had not even coaled yet before she remarried. Thomas faced strong criticism from the Regency Council. Mary in particular was outraged by his actions. She was deeply offended and insisted that her half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, should no longer associate with Catherine. To many, his decision to marry Catherine so soon after Henry's death was unforgivable. It soon became clear that Thomas and Catherine had already been involved before their marriage. Nevertheless, after the wedding, Thomas moved in with his wife at her home, Chelsea Manor in London. Catherine, Thomas Seymour, and the 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth all lived together under the same roof. Later they moved to Sudeley Castle, the Admiral's residence. Following the death of Henry, Catherine became the guardian of her stepdaughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth had already had a good relationship with Catherine before the king died, and they remained close. Catherine even helped repair Elizabeth's relationship with her father. Because of her influence, Henry restored Elizabeth to the line of succession. They shared a love of religion and learning. Catherine fostered Elizabeth's intellectual growth and introduced her to the principles of the Protestant Reformation. These ideas would later shape Elizabeth's reign. Initially, everything seemed almost perfect. They appeared to be a small and happy family, and Elizabeth seemed content. For the first time in her life, she lived in a stable and caring home. Catherine treated her like a daughter. However, Thomas Seymour treated her differently. It didn't take long for Seymour to turn his attention to the princess. While living in the same household, Thomas began to behave inappropriately toward Elizabeth. Some accounts claim that he abused her on several occasions. There are few accounts of Seymour's behaviour towards Elizabeth for us to form a relatively sound opinion of his actions, especially when we consider them from a modern perspective, with a better understanding of abuse. Some sources state Seymour and Elizabeth engaged in romps and horseplay. Seymour would rise early to rouse his household. He would barge into Elizabeth's room at the crack of dawn in only a nightgown. He would then throw the covers off Elizabeth while she was still in bed and wearing only a thin nightgown herself. He would tickle her, grope her, slap her behind and touch her in a way that was considered wildly inappropriate, not because of her age, but because they were unmarried and any stain on her reputation, even just from idle gossip, could ruin her life forever. Elizabeth was a princess of England. She needed to be seen as chaste and pure. The royalty of Europe would never consider her as a marriage prospect if her virginity was in doubt. Back then, a woman's maidenhead was as important as her dowry. And not only this, but Thomas was himself married to Elizabeth's stepmother. His behaviour was outrageous even for the time, but now it would be outright criminal. Elizabeth was 14 and Seymour was nearly 40. To make matters worse, Catherine would often join her husband in his playfulness towards their daughter. She would tickle Elizabeth alongside Seymour, and on one occasion, she even held her down while he cut the princess's black mourning dress to shreds in front of other residents of the household. Elizabeth took measures to stop the unwanted attention. To avoid him entering her chambers in the morning and playing with her, she would rise early, dress and surround herself with her ladies, driven by a strong sense of entitlement and a desire to outmaneuver his brother. Thomas Seymour was also highly charismatic and a notorious ladies' man. He could charm almost anyone, even Elizabeth's governess, Cat Ashley. This made him especially dangerous. He often got what he wanted and his actions were usually self-serving, often harming those around him. The young Elizabeth was not immune to his charm, and some believe she may have developed warm feelings toward him. But even by the standards of the time, when a 14-year-old girl was considered old enough for marriage, his behaviour was still inappropriate. Eventually, Catherine realised this for herself. She allegedly caught her husband and stepdaughter in an embrace. Soon after, Elizabeth was sent away to live elsewhere, and Catherine herself reportedly fell ill. It seems Catherine eventually realised that her choice of husband had been a mistake. Their marriage was not the partnership of equals she'd once believed it to be. Only a few months after sending Elizabeth away, Catherine died shortly after giving birth to her first and only child. Her widower, Thomas Seymour, wasted no time. He once again set his sights on the now 15-year-old Elizabeth and the chance to seize power. She was the king's favourite sister and the second in line for the throne, and some even saw her as the only real heir due to her Protestant beliefs. But Seymour overreached and made a fatal error. The story goes that he bribed guards to let him into Hampton Court Palace, where he broke into the king's chambers and attempted to kidnap him. During the pandemonium, Thomas shot and killed the king's beloved dog. After years of impulsivity and grossly manipulative, unstable behaviour, Thomas Seymour had finally gone too far. He sealed his fate that night, leaving the Lord Protector with the impossible task of signing his own brother's death warrant. Elizabeth was questioned during the ensuing investigation. Suspicion was cast on her and her involvement. Did she mean to marry Thomas, depose her brother and take the throne for herself with the help of her husband? The Regency Council had her maids, including her governess, arrested. Elizabeth herself was placed under house arrest and interrogated for 3 weeks. Through this investigation, the council learned the extent of Seymour's improper behaviour towards Elizabeth, but they could not pin a single thing on the princess herself. At only 15 years old, she outwitted her interrogators at every turn. The council embarrassed themselves by chasing their tails and coming up short thanks to the razor-sharp savvy of Elizabeth. She was defiant, logical, and masterfully cunning in her dealings with men twice her age. Like mother, like daughter. But it cannot be denied that this experience shocked and shaped Elizabeth. Eventually, the council dropped their case against the princess. Seymour, however, was executed for treason on March 20th, 1549. It took 2 blows of the axe to finally sever his head from his body. Elizabeth never spoke of him or the affair again. What something like this does to a young mind is much clearer to us now in the 21st century. Any kind of abuse alters the brain, but child abuse changes the entire trajectory of a person's life. Elizabeth's relationship with Seymour no doubt taught her that she could be easily used for the designs of men. She would always be an object of desire in the eyes and hearts of men who wanted more than what they had. The next Thomas Seymour could be worse. He was not a covert operator, and it was relatively easy to spot his schemes. But there were plenty of men at court who were twice as deceitful and twice as greedy. Perhaps Elizabeth learned a hard lesson here, that she could never trust any man. A husband could kill his wife, a father could kill his child's mother, a stepfather could abuse his stepchildren, while Elizabeth appointed many great men who loyally advised and guided her throughout her reign. She always remembered that she was a vessel to ultimate power, and it seems she did not trust any man with that power. Whether that was the right decision for her or not, we will never know. But one thing is for certain, Elizabeth did what she needed to do, keep her head attached to her neck, and the power of England in the palm of her hands and her hands alone.